Lydia Chen, the only surviving human battleship commander, is resurrected by an ancient alien parasite that enables her to impersonate the Cathara and stow away aboard their flagship. She learns that the ship itself is a living being producing bioweapons to eliminate humans, so she hacks into their system to have them use the bioweapons on themselves, releasing a lethal pathogen throughout the entire alien fleet. While there, the parasite mutates her into a human-alien hybrid, telling humanity that it was created by an ancient alien species in order to prevent them from destroying themselves, and she returns to Earth, giving humanity the option to evolve or face self-extinction. Nen Commander Lydia Chen was dead for 3 minutes and 47 seconds before the alien parasite woke her again. The beast, no larger than a hummingbird and 1,000 times as deadly, had tunneled through her thoracic cavity and coiled itself around her heart as if it were a living pacemaker. She could feel it pulse with every beat, alien and intimate, an invasion that had saved her life. NNTHE escape pod floated through the remains of the wreckage that was the Earth's flagship battleship, the UES Prometheus. The 238 souls in Lydia's crew had boiled off in the explosion, and their screams haunted her memory. She was the only one left alive, and that survival had come at a cost she was only just starting to grasp. NTHE parasite spoke to her in the language of ages long before humanity coiled itself out of this dust, and its voice permeated her thoughts like smoke through water. It displayed images of the Cathara homeworld, a world where biology and technology had become one, creating a thing that was nothing a human could conceive of. She saw cities that lived, weapons that grew, and ships that regenerated from wounds that should have been fatal. And, most importantly, she laid eyes on the flagship, the Sovereign's Bane, a living mutant cathedral of alien design, the command vessel for the vast Cathara invasion fleet. It was aboard this ship that the aliens had managed their systematic trail of destruction of human worlds, plundering of Earth's resources and research on captured human subjects. Malidia's fingers deftly danced over the escape pod's controls. The parasite had lent her more than life. It had lent her learning. Now she knew how their technology worked, how their bioweapons were grown and unleashed, and, most importantly of all, how they could be turned against them. NNTHE idea that occurred to her was as absurd as it was audacious. She would have to stow away on the flagship, not as a captive, but as one of them. Her curse would be her disguise, hiding her human signature, free to wander the ship's living halls. Once she was inside, she would find the core biolab where the Cathara designed their most lethal weapons, and she would poison them from the inside. It would mean accommodating the alien nothingness within her, coming to terms with the slow change that was already underway. She could feel herself rapidly mutating both on a cellular level and in the alteration of her DNA as it rewrote itself around the intruder. She'd soon be neither human nor Cathara, but some sort of crossbred thing that was fully neither type of creature. NNBUT, if that was what it took to halt the invasion, to save the scattered remnants of humanity, then she would pay it gladly. Sensors aboard the escape pod registered movement in the debris field. 3 Cathara scout ships were bearing down on them, their bioluminescent hulls shimmering malevolently. Lydia turned on the pod's emergency beacons and readied herself for detention. The parasite's influence coursed through her nervous system, teaching her how to manage her heartbeat, how to regulate her body's chemical responses, how to fake unconsciousness. With the scout ships flanking her pod with curling fingers of living metal, it was pulled into the cargo bay of the headship. Lydia felt the artificial gravity kick in as the pod was locked down, finally allowing herself to slide into the comatose slumber the parasite needed for its disguise. NNSHE awoke in a holding cell on board Sovereign's Bane, her body bound in straps on a bioexam table, a device that resembled the same manufacture of the ship. The table was warm and faintly yielding, like skin, and she could feel it testing her blood chemistry with microscopical probes. NNTHE examining room was an orchestra of foreign construction. The walls twisted in impossible planes, and their surfaces festered with what appeared to be nerve clusters pumping with bioluminescent light. The atmosphere was itself a living thing. ACRAWL, with spores and invisible things serving as the ship's eyes and ears and nose. Ninkithera researcher. A Cathara researcher glided into the room, its elongated body undulating like that of some deep-sea creature. He could see the intricate, overlapping organs within the alien translucent skin, each of them serving multiple purposes that humankind would never be able to comprehend. It watched with complex eyes, full of swirling galaxies and its eyes. Compound structures that regarded Lydia with clinical fascination. NNTHE researcher said, in the harmonic language of its species, a sound resembling the wind chimes of bone and sinew. The parasite in Lydia automatically translated and added human connotations over the alien words. NNTHE test subject has an interesting level of parasitic integration, it noted, its mental voice tinged with curiosity. The biosymbiont is at a point of unparalleled harmony with the human body. This sample could be useful for the adaptation of protocols. Lydia lay rigid, her breath falling quick and steady. Through the parasite, she learned to regulate her brainwaves and mentally print the unconsciousness of a man, while enjoying full consciousness. She could almost feel the researcher's probes skimming her tissue, examining the alterations that the parasite had made to the cellular matrix. The integrated coefficient has surpassed the baseline parameters, continued the researcher, its excitement growing. Suggest transferring to LLC-7 immediately for full eval. The bioweapons department will be most enlightening by this specimen. NNTHE researcher was gone, and Lydia was alone with the ship's environmental consciousness. The ship's awareness weighed against her mind as an enormous intelligence that filled every wall and drew breath through every duct. The ship had wondered about her, fascinated by the unorthodox manner of her parasitic assimilation. Lydia even started to reach out with her consciousness, the parasite acting as a conduit that connected it to the bioneural systems of the vessel. It was a difficult one, and she had to bury her innate human disgust at the alien touch. The parasite led her down the connection, teaching her how to move through the ship's living geometry without awakening its defense mechanisms. AmenSHE felt the Sovereign's bane as the Kythara felt it, through the ship's perception. It was no ordinary ship, you see. It was a living thing, symbiotically engineered rather than constructed. The hallways were veins, the rooms were organs, and the crew were symbiotic creatures that lived in complete harmony with their host. NNSHE could see the bridge, the place where the ship captain fused with the ship's mind, where the two nervous systems became one hybrid thing. She saw the bioweapon factories, great caverns in which skittering alien scientists brewed diseases and parasites that would eat human flesh. The most horrible sight of all were the human experimentation chambers where captured colonists were brutalized in ways that no less cruel human torturer would have been able to stand. NTHE knowledge swept through her like a venom, each revelation more terrible than the last. The Kythara were not just subjugating humanity, they were observing them, discovering how to pull human society apart from within. They had developed parasites that could take over human behavior, viruses with the power to rewrite human DNA, and bioweapons capable of transforming entire populations into brainwashed slaves. But with knowledge came opportunity. Lydia now knew more about the ship's weaknesses, the biology that kept it alive, and the biology that kept it functioning. There were vulnerabilities in every form of life, biological imperatives that could be manipulated. The Kythara had transformed their ship into something overwhelmingly powerful, but also something too complex to be entirely self-sufficient. NIF. She could break up those relationships, turn the ship's biological functions upon itself. She could do what a fleet of human ships had not. NNTHE transport came, hours later, a smaller creature that clung to the examination table, and started the process of relocating Lydia to Laboratory Complex 7. She kept up her guise of unconsciousness as they carted her through the mobile home of the alien corridors, past rooms crammed with alien tech that no human could comprehend. NNTHE Laboratory Complex was an act of bioengineering and was composed of a series of interconnected chambers where the Kythara performed their most delicate research. The walls were covered with flat-growing tanks of cultures, exhibiting various substances for growth. Some were obvious weapons, beings built to kill and destroy most efficiently. Others were more insidious, parasites and viruses that could infect human society and grow all but unnoticed. And Lydia was strapped onto a different examining table, which had more advanced monitoring equipment. Hundreds of sensor nodes on the surface of the table had recorded the full details of every aspect of her biochemistry, building up a 3D profile of her body and the parasite integration points within it. NNTHE, principal investigator on this site, was not the same on her first examination. This was an older Kythara, the translucent skin displaying the intricate scarring lines of deep-level biomodification. The eyes pix. The eyes harbored a rationale almost human in complexity, and when it spoke, the mental voice was eager and searching, not the eerie monotone of an insane asylum's TV room. Interesting, the scientists thought as they read over the output from Lydia's examination. The host's biology has not accepted the symbiont, it has accepted it and incorporated it, and it has rejected the rest of the world. The neural pathways will be stronger, the immune response will be up, and cell regeneration is running at better than 300% over the norm. This is unprecedented. No NNTHE researcher came up close, its compound eyes shining the bright blue bioluminescence that surrounded the examination table. N-HIWR that this accretion / was natural or artificial. It looks like they're breeding it, modifying it by genetic manipulation we'd take centuries to achieve. And Lydia stiffened with the realization. The parasite in her was not just some Kythara bioweapon. It was unique, it was created expressly for this. But by who? And why did it decide to save her life? NNTHE scientists started to make a more detailed inspection with instruments that appeared to have a mind of their own. She felt the mind of the probe skim along her own, and she knew that now was her chance. The parasite had trained her in interfacing with Kythara biotech, and these examination tools were just as much alive as the ship was. Fiona started to project herself into the probe, using him as a conduit to the lab's core data pool. The data that filled her was mind-boggling in its size. The Kythara had been preparing an invasion of Earth for over a century, learning humanity's biology through taking specimens and infiltrator organisms. NNBUT, most significantly, she discovered blueprints for the ship's bioweapon production systems. The Sovereign's Bane was not just a command ship, it was a moving laboratory capable of mass-producing bioweapons that could scour whole star systems from existence. The biological was in the service of the manufacturing, and it could be abused and broken. NNTHE researcher noticed something. Unusual neural activity detected, it noted, a hint of alarm in its voice. Patient demonstrating an arousal pattern not consistent with sedation protocols. Lydia felt the clock ticking. The researcher was starting to suspect that she was up, and when that happened, the lab already had security measures. She would have to move fast before the Kythara suspected what she was up to. She opened her eyes, propping herself into a sitting position on the examination table with a grace and ease that seemed impossible given those restraints. The parasite had unprecedentedly empowered her, and the bio-restraints broke like spiderweb. NNTHE researcher jumped, its voice of harmony rising in a harsh alarm that would send security forces running. But Lydia went there already, her living mind in the lab's organism systems. She tapped into the ship's neural network, flooding it with cascading commands that redirected the facility's own defenses against its operators. NNTHE growing tanks were bursting and leaking onto the laboratory floor. But neither were these random bioweapons. These were carefully selected life forms that Lydia had discovered during her clandestine foray into the ship's data core. Organisms engineered to prey upon Kythara biology, viruses that would reprogram alien DNA, symbiotic creatures that could hijack host nervous systems. The conditions in the lab was so bad, the researcher made an effort to make escape, and all the security doors was compromised. Doors had been shut down, sealing all inside with the released organisms. Lydia's eyes were grimly pleased as the alien's albino skin started to become inflamed, black veins pulsing from the areas the innumerable parasites had encountered. You don't realize, the scientist's mental voice was weak. The bodily transformations going on inside its own body were coming through to its speech. The symbiont inside you, it's not one of ours. It is something else, something you would think should not exist. A cold shiver of doubt ran down Lydia's spine. What do you mean? The marker genes, the integration patterns, they're off. That organism has gone extinct for thousands of years. The Great Purge, ruined for being a threat to nature. The scientist's body was starting to decompose as the bioweapons took their effect. You're not just the host of a parasite. You've got the seed of our destruction. Lydia felt the implications like a punch in the gut. They hadn't merely infected her with a Kythara bioweapon, but with something that the Kythara themselves dreaded. something that had been willfully suppressed, buried until the time was right to spring. NNBUT. There was no time to process this disclosure. The lab's alarm systems were starting to kick in. She could hear the sound of security forces approaching in the corridors. She had to finish the job before they managed to halt her. NNSHE took control of the central bioweapon production systems by means of the ship's own neural network. The Sovereign's Bane was fitted with huge "life reactors, capable of generating enough disease to cleanse an entire planet. All of these power plants were also hooked up to the ship's life support systems, a distribution network capable of dispersing bioweapons throughout the entire ship with lethal force. Lydia started reprogramming the reactors, levering what she'd been taught about Cathara biology by the parasite. She had integrated genetic sequences that focused on the aliens' unique physiologies, precipitating a biological attack that would set the ship's systems against those who manned it. NNSHE completed her work just as the security forces broke in through the lab. Cathara soldiers poured into the chamber, their bioweapons already charged to lethal. But Lydia was not fully human anymore, and the parasite inside her had given her capabilities that exceeded the realm of what an ordinary human was capable of. NNSHE danced through the attacking soldiers, her boosted reflexes keeping her out of the way of their bioenergy blasts as her empowered muscles shredded their armoring. The lab-escaped organisms helped her, swarming through the insects and emitting species-specific toxins that paralyzed their nervous systems. NNBUT. Even as she battled, Lydia felt the pace of changes quickening within her body. The parasite was no longer content to lie idle. It was transforming her, readying her for some purpose she did not yet comprehend. She was going transparent, her skin showing the intricate mesh of modified organs beneath. Her eyes were evolving the complex construction that would enable her to see the broad array of bioluminescent cast signals. NNSHE was turning into someone new, someone we'd never had before. A cross between human and Cathara DNA, directed by a creature who testified to the coevolution of their forms. The change doubled its pace, gaining up with her in the ship's corridors. The bio-wheeze she had released had spread through the Sovereign's Bane's life support, and she felt the vessel's pain through her neural link. The ship was beginning to fight back, turning itself on its crew, its biological functions rejecting the Cathara presence, just as it would a squatter foreign organism. Lydia entered the ship's central nervous system, a large chamber where the ship's mind was spread out among a collection of organic processors. The ship captain was here, and its shape had long ago coalesced with the control systems, a union that would be mutually beneficial for decades. The captain's gaze followed her into the chamber, and she felt it lean heavily against her mind. "Nin, you have done much hurt," the captain had noted, its mental voice containing nuances of reluctant admiration. "But that which has already commenced, you cannot arrest. The resistance is thousands strong, and if this ship falls, others will still carry out the mission." NNTHE captain's words rang all too true to Lydia, even as she felt something else. She could feel the other ships in the fleet, via her link to the ship's neural network. It was a big circle of communication happening between these guys. They were all in contact with each other and communicating and cooperating via a huge biological messaging system. And now that network had been violated. The bicamy she had triggered wasn't only attacking the Sovereign's Bane. It had spread through the communications and was infesting every ship in the fleet. The parasites and viruses she had unleashed were adaptive, changing as they moved from ship to breach the Cathara's biological defenses. "The life form within you," the captain added, its voice now ragged as the ship's organics cascaded into shutdown mode. "It's a predecessor life, isn't it? The primordial species from which both human and Cathara evolved." Suddenly there came to Lydia a ray of light. The parasite that inhabited her was not solely a bioweapon, it was a legacy, a last bequest from a species that had outgrown their physical form countless eons past. The predecessor race had anticipated such conflict, had been ready for the day when their two greatest works of evolution would meet in battle. They expected this day to come, the captain murmured, its body beginning to lose cohesion as the vessel's immune system attacked. They kind of prepped for one of their kids to do something to the other. The symbiont within you is their answer, their attempt to keep both species alive. The captain's body slumped, its awareness receding into the ailing neural net of the ship. Lydia experienced the death throes of the Sovereign's bane through her link to its systems. But she also felt something more. The ship's metabolism was being rerouted, its production systems re-encoded to produce something very, very different. An NTHE ship was turning into a chrysalis, its dying biology spawning something that had never been before. At the same time that she saw all that, Lydia could feel the changes in her own body speeding up. She was almost done changing. She was becoming a bridge between peoples and a symbol of what was possible if cooperation took the place of confrontation. Using the ship's communication system, she contacted the human resistance groups found among the other planets of the system. The information that had been given to her by the parasite let her operate human technology as though Cathara biosystems. She would then upload all that knowledge she'd earned, the weaknesses and the secret hideouts of aliens she'd encountered. More critically, however, she started broadcasting the genetic matrix the Sovereign's bane was generating in its final instance. These were not killing machines, not even weapons, but instruments of change, creatures that could enable humans to interface with Catharic technology without losing their essence as beings. It was a painful procedure, if one did not consent willingly to the presence of symbiotic organisms that would alter the course of human biology for all time. But it was also inevitable, the only path to the equilibrium the predecessors had sought. And with the transmission done, Lydia felt the vessel's organic systems finally cease. The Sovereign's bane was a corpse, floating impassively through the void. But in its death, it had achieved something that no human weapon could. The bioweapon she'd unleashed had already traveled through the Cathara fleet and had infected their own biological systems. An NTHE invasion had ended, but the war had only begun. Cathara, those who remained, would adapt, would learn how to defeat the bioweapons that had decimated them. And mankind would have to determine if it were willing to make the change and be able to wage battle against its alien foes. And Lydia was alone in the belly of the ship, and she was changed. She wasn't human anymore, and she wasn't Cathara. She was different, a sign that there was a potential other future in which they didn't have to annihilate each other. NTHE emergency pods she had rigged would take her message to the human colonies, as well as the genetic ideas that she and others would have to follow in order to be transformed as she had. But some would agree to the change, to the superior capabilities the symbiotic association would offer. Others would refuse it, staying purely human despite of how much this disadvantage would bring. NNBUT, the decision would be up to them, and that was what mattered most. The predecessors had equipped both species with the means for survival, but had also left them the freedom to find their own destiny. As Lydia readied herself to escape the dead ship, the parasite within her pulsed with something that she could only think of as satisfaction. Its centuries of sleep were at an end, its mission accomplished. It had been biding in darkness for thousands of years for this chance to stop the inevitable mutual destruction. NNSHE staggered towards the ship's docking bay, a small biopod that would take her back to human space. The ship, or rather the living thing that had grown from the surviving parts of the ship's dying biological systems, obediently did precisely what she wished it to do, all the while gently like a human pilot operating a mechanical craft. It would be weeks before they made it back to Earth, but Lydia was in no rush. She had a lot to think through, a lot to get ready for. Her turnabout had been the start of the change that would sweep humanity and be followed by a new species that would be a mix of human and Cathara features. There would obviously be resistance. Most humans would consider the symbiotic adaptation to be a betrayal of their fundamental humanity, a perversion of what it meant to be a human. They'd resist the change, regardless of the price they would pay by being left behind to suffer defeat at the hands of their alien foes. NNBUT, others would get it, would see the media-hooked false smile for what it really was. Not a capitulation to alien forces, but a growth, a move in the long road of becoming something new, a future in which distinct species might live together in harmony, not in conflict. NNTHE biopod zoomed over the wreckage of the debris field, heading to the site of the bloodiest battle in human history. The remains of both human and Cathara ships floated between the stars, monuments to the uselessness of military options when it came to interstellar struggles. NNBUT, even among the wreckage, Lydia could see signs of new life. The bioweapons she'd let loose had developed, and now fed off the strange environment of space. They were evolving into something new, living things that could live in the void between the stars, forming a biological network that one day might reach across the galaxy. NNTHE predecessors had been dreamers, she understood. They'd predicted not only the feud between their two greatest experiments, but a possibility of synthesis, of something more than either of their species alone could accomplish. Once the biopod moved into the outer solar system, Lydia went to work writing her message to the humans. She would talk to them about the choice they were making, about the transformation that could prevent extinction of their species. She would impart the knowledge that the parasite had allowed her to gain, that biological and technological systems could efficiently coexist in perfect unity. Others said she was a traitor, a collaborator who had betrayed her own kind in exchange for the alien forces. The rest would praise her as a savior, a builder of a new humanity that transcended anything that had ever come before it, and NBUT Lydia knew the truth. She was no traitor or savior, only a facilitator, a channel between two races who had been divided by ignorance and fear. The rest was up to others, the humans willing to take the risk, to the Cathara who chose to become a race of cooperation rather than conquest. NNTHE future was up in the air, but it was also full of promise. For the first time since the invasion had started, mankind had had a fighting chance not just to survive, but to live. The cost of that survival was change, the readiness to embrace the fact that humanity's next evolutionary move might not be entirely human. An Earth filled the biopod's sensors, and Lydia felt the parasite inside her throb in what could have been hope. The long war was done, but the longer journey toward genuine peace had just begun, and she would be there to lead the way, a living emblem of what could be accomplished when two species chose cooperation over conflict. NNTHE change had started with her, but it would not end with her. It would work its way through human space, spawning a new race of hybrid animals able to bridge the gap between human and Cathara tech. They would build a future in which such rigid hierarchies between species were meaningless, and where the only barrier to cooperation was a refusal to work toward shared goals. And in that future, the loss of life of the crew of the Prometheus would not be for naught. Their deaths had facilitated the finding of the parasite, the agent that would change humanity into an entity that could compete in a galaxy populated with alien life forms. They had died as men, but their descendants would survive as something in between, creatures that would carry their genetic inheritance to the stars. NNTHE biopod howled through the atmosphere of the Earth, a living hull responding to differences in temperature and pressure, just as a bird would respond to the atmosphere. Downward, the birth planet of humanity lurked, rent by the first invasion, but not dead, not so much that it would fail to sustain the new life that would come out of the great change. Lydia experienced the parasite throb one last time before its thought joined with hers as one. She was no longer Lydia Chen, Earth Defense Force commander, but something different, something new, and something that had not existed before. She was a new kind of being, a hybrid, and what they all hoped was the best possible chance for peace between the children of the predecessors. NTHE future was uncertain, though full of promise. And for the first time since the invasion started, it was sufficient.